Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our I Am Speaker Series. I am Dr. Teresa McKenzie, and I'm the Accessibility and Veteran Services Coordinator at the Southern Campus of Ohio University. Today, we are going to meet Josh Blanton. He is our speaker for today's series, but before he starts, and I'm not going to give you a lot of information about him because the whole purpose of this is for you to learn about him from him. And I want to give you a little background on why we do this. Robert Pleasant and I, who isn't here today, about 5 years ago started a series called the I Am Speaker Series. We started this based on a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King. His quote was, "I am convinced that men hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other, and they don't know each other because they don't communicate with each other. And they don't communicate with each other because they are separated from each other." The I Am Speaker Series is a chance for you to get to know someone else in the community. We hope to tear down barriers by allowing people to share their stories, because once you know someone's story, we think it's harder for you to hate someone and to ignore that person as a human being. So just want to add that in there. And now, Josh, thank you and welcome.
Well, thank you, Dr. McKenzie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for that introduction. And if you're okay, I'll just go ahead and get started. Okay, well, like I said, thank you for having me. And, I'll explain in a little bit why I think this event is so important and why these discussions are so important that I've learned through the years. But so go ahead and well, first of all, so did an introduction. I manage a plant that's in the steel industry. I started with AK Steel, which is a company that operated a plant here. My family has a long line of working in the steelmaking business, and I'm proud to do that. I'm also a commissioner here in the City of Ashland as well, and I'm an adjunct faculty member at Marshall teaching supply chain logistics, which is an interesting class these days. So I was born in Ashland here at King's Daughters Medical Center, and lived here for a while. My parents divorced at a pretty early age for me, and like a lot of kids around the country now, and ended up living in Southern Ohio. Went to a small high school called Sims Valley, and it's a very, very small high school way out in the country. That's where I went to high school, and kind of went back and forth every other weekend to my dad's house over here in Ashland, and between here and Sims Valley, and that's where I grew up. So very very rural area out there, and came to the big city of Ashland every other weekend. But so that's where I grew up, and so moving on into when I was in high school. I was a senior in high school, and this is kind of where the story of who I am started. And I was my stepdad at the time, he got sick, and he was diagnosed with lung cancer due to asbestos, and it was a very short illness before it took his life. And so he passed away on Christmas Day of 2000. So I was a senior in high school. I played basketball and sports, and he passed away on Christmas Day. So obviously that was a huge time in my life, kind of a one of those things that you really look back on, obviously. And so at the time, and by the way, this is going to be a pretty intense story, and it's a story that I've told quite a few times. So it's I'm able to get through it pretty easily now. But it's important to tell this story because there are a lot of kids at that same age who are going through a very similar story in this area right now. So, and then I'll transition the story a little bit later also. So at the time, he was, like I said, his illness was very brief and before it took his life. So he was using some very strong painkillers. And what we didn't realize at the time was my mother had, it's obviously anyone who's ever taken care of someone with an illness like that and eventually loses them, it's an incredibly difficult time, obviously. So my mother had been using some of those prescription medications to really help her get through that time. And and that's not uncommon. That happens a lot, and that's how a lot of addiction happens in this area. And so, as I mentioned, I was a senior in high school. My sister was she was 16 at the time. She was in high school as well. Our stepdad had just passed, and my mother had this whole other issue that was going on that we really didn't understand. And so that continued for the next couple of years. I started actually at OU Southern in the fall of 2000, right after high school. And the next couple of years went by, and I went to classes and tried as best as I could to get through the beginning of my academic career, which would turn out to be a long academic career. But and essentially my mother just kept going downhill, basically, as far as addiction. And I mentioned that my stepdad passed away from asbestos, mesothelioma cancer of the lung. And you've probably seen a lot of commercials on TV from lawyers and things like that with that disease. And during that time, that was litigated as well on his behalf. And my mother actually received a large sum of money about 2 years later after his death. Could not have come at a worse time for her. And so it was pretty much the worst thing that you could give someone who's in the throes of a severe addiction. And life got pretty wild at that time, and lots of she was around sometimes we weren't really sure where she was. There were lots of people in and out that we weren't really sure what was going on. But at that time, my sister and I were still completely dependent on her. And I should also preface this to say that up until this issue happened, I had I'm biased, but I had literally the best mother of all time. She was the mom that made like the custom Halloween costumes that were like the coolest things ever. She was just unbelievable. And, I think back to all these different examples of when I was a kid and the different things that she did that, I hope that, I'm half the parent that she was when I was growing up. And that plays into, anyone who has a close family member with addiction. I think there's a level of denial that happens there. This person, you love this person throughout your life in a certain way, and that's how you know them. There's no way that this other person, there's no way that that could be true. And there's kind of a level of denial there. Now, again, I was 18, 19 years old. My sister was very young as well. So we were dealing with it as best we could, and we were still completely dependent on her. So eventually, she began to have more severe issues, and landed in legal trouble and things like that. Was in jail a couple times, and it all kind of came to a head, and how it really the situation that happened that really kind of told me that this was I couldn't be in denial anymore. I was driving, I was going to Columbus to go to a concert, and I stopped at Speedway in Ironton, and this was in 2003, I believe. And I was coming back to get in my car, and someone approaches me and they say, "Get in the car," and they get in the passenger side of the car. So they get in and they tell me that they have a gun and that they're going to drive me sorry, I got that wrong. They actually got into the driver's seat. I was in the passenger seat, and they said that to get in the car and they're going to take the car. And so I said, okay. And, in that situation, everyone thinks that they know how they would react in that situation. I'm telling you, you don't really know how you would react in that situation. So I got in the car and started thinking to myself, okay, maybe I can talk my way out of this somehow. I had no idea what was going on. We drive out outside of Ironton, out one of the roads, and then I notice there's a car behind us, and I just suspect it's whoever this person was with. I start trying to talk them out. I say, hey, I can give you, money or my wallet or whatever you need, and they're not really responding. And so the car slows down just in the middle of the road, and I was not really sure what was going to happen. Probably the most scared I've ever been in my life, and he just said, get out of the car. And I said, okay. So I got out of the car, and he turned around and drove off with the other car. Now I run quite a bit, or I haven't lately, but running is a hobby for me. But I guarantee you that I've never set a faster mile time than what I did in that situation. So I took off running, and just ran until I came to the first house and knocked on the door. Luckily, it was someone that I knew, and they, I had called the police and got a ride back to town and made it out of that. And come to find out, my mother had actually taken the title of my car and forged my signature for collateral for essentially a drug situation. And it's a lot of people that are in these scenarios or hear people going through these scenarios. Well, how could you not, hate that person forever? And, I wasn't in denial then. Obviously, then I knew it was a serious situation, but she was still my mother, and I still thought of her. But even at that age, I didn't understand addiction. I didn't understand all of that, but I understood this wasn't the person that raised me. So, long story short, she ended up getting in more legal trouble, left the area for several years, and we lost contact. Every now and then we would get a phone call here and there, but pretty much for the next several years, she was not here. And so at that time, my sister and I had to grow up pretty quickly, and that's, I wasn't able to go to school for a while, and had a lot of support during that time, had a lot of friends who helped me out and things like that, and eventually got back into school. And my advisor was John Miller. I think he's still there at OU. But I remember my GPA at the time, and this may be a record, I'm not sure, but I think it's the lowest GPA to ever come back and actually graduate. So, but I did. I came back and graduated. I worked as a server at C.R. Thomas here in Ashland and Ironton, and kind of worked my way back through and finally gained some independence. And obviously it was a tough situation. I was an intern at King's Daughters, worked through different jobs, and was able to make it through college. Started as an intern at AK Steel, eventually became a supervisor there, and then it was the end of 2013, the very end of after Christmas, we got a call that my mother was very sick, and she actually had cancer, and she was in the late stages. So we actually traveled. My sister and I traveled to Tennessee to bring her back home, and she was with us for about 2 weeks in hospice care, and then she came. We brought her to my house, and she actually passed away. So, but during that time, it was a little bit of closure from that entire situation, and that we got to spend at least 2 weeks where she was not, she was not addicted at that time, and so we got to spend some time with her before she passed away, and I'm very thankful for that. A lot of people don't get that opportunity when they have a family member who's addicted, but we did, and I'm thankful for that. But so that happened. It was Valentine's Day of 2013 when she passed away, and then I went on to go through the MBA program at OU, and graduated from there, and eventually ended up going to South Carolina to work for a company there, and then came back to Vesuvius in Wurtland, and they had a position there as a plant manager, and I was able to get that position, and I've been there, taken a few different roles with the company since then, but it's been a great company to work for, and I'm very thankful that I've been able to find a company that I'm happy with in this area. And so I like to tell that story. Like I said, it's a pretty intense story, and and I don't go into a whole lot of detail, but there are lots of different incidents that happened during that time that were tough. But I like to tell that story because there are just lots of kids, lots of adults who are either dealing with addiction or dealing with having a family member or a loved one who is dealing with the same thing. And we didn't have very much growing up anyway. I grew up in a single wide trailer until I all the way through high school, actually. And shared a room with my sister all the way up until middle school, and it was it was one of those situations we didn't, things were different for us back then, and we didn't really understand that we didn't have a lot. So we were happy though, and we had a happy childhood. But I like to explain that because there are so many kids that in this area who are in that situation as well, and especially today it feels like it's not very popular to talk about being from a situation like that, and a lot of kids, it's I like to connect myself to kids to let them know that you can literally be at a point where you have horrible things happening at home or horrible situations you're dealing with. In the end, you can be, it does help to have some support, but really, if the old cliche is if you want to do something, you can do it. I don't like saying that just by itself. I like saying, well, how do you do it? How do you, what's the plan to do it? Because, I had to really sit down after that entire situation and figure out, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to just, keep the electric on? How am I going to, get through this? And it took time. Like I said, it took 7 years to end up getting a bachelor's degree, but I was able to do it. And so it's we do the Young Men's Conference with ACTC, and that's one of the things I try to do with my group is say not comparing backgrounds or situations, but this is where I came from, and it was at several times it was some pretty low points. There is a path out of this. There's a path forward, and there are people and there are resources there to help if you find them. Um, all right, transitioning this then. So I've been with Vesuvius since late 2015. I started to get involved with the city a lot more, nonprofits and volunteer type activities, and really enjoyed that. And in 2019 decided that, I think that I want to try to make a difference in an official capacity. And so I decided to run for office, and I did that. And but it took a lot of time to think about that, because and exactly what can I offer, what can I do to help the city, help the citizens. And it wasn't just one of those things I just decided to do one day. It was, I put a lot of thought into it, and went right up until the deadline to decide to do it. But it's something that I've really, really enjoyed. It's only been a year so far. It's almost been a year to the day since the election, and it's something that I've really, really, really enjoyed. But it's also coincided with a lot of interesting things that have happened in our country, socially. And, it's one of the things that I've really been proud of with the city is that we've started to open up a little bit more, to have more diverse type events. I think it's key that the city provides an environment, no matter who you are. If you want to express yourself, or you want to have an event, whatever your passion or your cause is, that we facilitate that and we make it happen. Yes, there's a process, and organizing these events is a lot of work, but if you want to put the work in and make it happen, you can do it in Ashland, and it doesn't matter what your event is. That's something that I've really been proud to be a part of. Obviously in 2020, with the murder of George Floyd and a lot of the issues that happened in 2020, and being as it was the year that we were campaigning, obviously this is a local office. The city commissioner is a part-time position, supposed to be part-time position for us. It's not nearly as involved as maybe a senator or a congressman or something like that, but still very important. And campaigning still takes over your life, believe me. And it's those issues. At that time, I kind of had to step back and say, we're in Ashland, Kentucky. How do I how do I go about this? I've always been someone to really to follow along, social issues, and try to stay up and understand, kind of the pulse of what was happening. And I just decided, I need to do that here. And the best way to do it in this particular situation is to ask the people who live here. And, at that time let's see, I'm going to say probably I think it was June 2020 timeframe. We had a march downtown, and that was what I call the first march. And that was a group of citizens that put together a march, and that happened in Ashland. And at the time I said, I think that though we need to talk to the African American community in the city and understand. So we actually had a meeting, and I can remember that meeting where it happened. And we had Chantel Cockrell from her husband's a pastor of Christ Temple Church here in Ashland. We met with her and a few other people at one of our friends' house here, and just kind of said, we're trying to gauge, we understand you can't speak for everyone, but I'm trying to gauge, as a white man, how do I support? Is there, whatever the voice needs to be from our community, how do I support that? And pretty much out of that meeting, and then out of a lot of work that came after that in the next few weeks, is the group that you see now called Ashland for Change. And that group really started as they said, okay, we want to do something in Ashland, but we want it to be something that provides not just the march. The march is important, very important, of course, but the information that we give, and we make people understand how we're feeling and why we're feeling this and what the history is and the education behind this. We want to do that. And I said, well, I can get behind that. And I can, my role in that time frame, and I kind of decided I need to support this I'm not in the front of this. I'm in the back of this, and I'm providing logistical support as much as I can. I'm trying. At that time, I wasn't in office, so I was trying to just use contacts that I had and help, be a liaison with the city. And at that time, city manager and the Mayor Gilmore at the time came to Christ Temple and met with the group and kind of worked out the plan of how everything was going to happen. And we ended up having just a phenomenal event. And Dr. McKenzie participated, and that group was amazing. But for me personally, the things that I learned during the event, but also with the friends that I made in Ashland for Change since the event, has really, and I think a very key point for me when I talk about race, or LGBTQIA plus issues, things like that. A key point for me is to say I don't know the answers. I am not an expert in any of this, but I understand there are people who are experiencing things that I don't experience. And I need to understand what I will never understand how they feel, but I can understand why, the reasons behind what's happening and the history of that. And so that's kind of always my mindset is you're never going to see me profess to say, well, I know exactly what's happening or, what this person's going through, but I will say I can feel, I listen to them and I learn from them. And I think that's just such a key point. And I'm always learning, and I make mistakes literally all the time. But I think when you come at it from a standpoint of trust, and I mean, all of my friends, my wife is Hispanic, right? And believe me, I make I make a lot of mistakes that get me in trouble. I like to think not a lot, but every now and then, and it may not be something overt, but it just maybe she'll say, hey, actually we say this, not this, or and I love that back and forth. I love, we have that dynamic, and I have really close friends in Ashland for Change, and we have that comfortable, we have that comfortable friendship where I can say, hey, is this, I feel a little bit weird about this word or this saying or something like that. What do you think about it? And we have a discussion. And that's not to say I will never make a mistake. I will make a mistake at some time, but I have the relationship from, and the most important thing is I'm willing to step back and say, hey, I made a mistake. I need to understand how to be better after this. So, and I think the whole canceling thing is something that frustrates me sometimes, because in almost every situation I see where someone makes a serious mistake, they say or do something, people, well, they're going to be canceled. They're going to be canceled. Well, almost always there's an opportunity for that person to say, wait, I'm going to step back and learn from this. And I think more often than not, you'll find that that's received very well. If your intention is to really learn from what happened, because none of us are experts on this. It's, especially in this culture, it's, the Appalachian culture, especially where I grew up, where I came from. I have no problem whatsoever saying that I came out of that culture with this, with some very bad tendencies, and it took education, it took experiences. The main experience that I like to talk about is when I was working at King's Daughters, and I don't mention anyone by name that hasn't given me permission to do this. So when you hear me say a name, they have given me permission to say their name. But one of my best friends is a man named Ronald Parker, and he's African American man, and I met him. We were working in valet at King's Daughters, parking cars together, and got to be really close friends. I mean, if you've ever met, as soon as you meet Ronald, your friend, he's your friend immediately. But he, we'd been friends for a couple of years, and at that time, the social aspect of race relations and things like that really, it really hadn't, in my life, I hadn't really thought much, too much about it. Ronald was my friend, and that was that. And we, one day he was returning a car to someone, and I was waiting on him to walk back with me. And the person he was given the keys to walks up and says, "Thanks a lot, N-word." And so at that time, I'd never been around a situation where I've seen that happen. And I saw him for half a second kind of freeze. And like I said, I'll never know how it felt for him to have that happen to him. But, from my limited, what I'm able to see, and I understood something in that moment that I had never understood before. There's nothing that anyone will ever call me in my life to make me feel the way he felt in that second. And that's when it kind of hit me. This is different. This is, but the key point here, and I think a lot of people, especially in this area, make this mistake, is what happened to him and his story and what that did to him. Understanding and empathizing with that does not diminish the fact that I came from the background that I came from. I can still tell my story, and still, I still had, a tough childhood and things like that. His story does not diminish that whatsoever. And so I think sometimes that happens of, when an issue of racism comes up, people sometimes say, well, what about I went through this, or I went through, it's both situations can happen, right? And so but I do think it's important to understand that, as a white man, I will never feel the way he felt in that second. And that's kind of the base to understand. And then from there, I actually took African American history at OU while I was there. And that class was extremely important as well, because we started to get into a little bit of the more systemic things that have happened throughout the history of the country. And we started to learn about redlining, and that there's actually been government policies that have separated minority populations. And it's that kind of formed the educational background. We all understand what racism is for the most part, but a lot of people don't understand that minority populations have. That's what systemic racism. That's what these. It's been literally in an institution of holding people back, and it's important to understand that, and that and the social media culture now is so difficult. I'm somebody that uses social media a lot, but it can be so destructive in the fact that context and that background never gets portrayed. It's social media exists. Let's be clear. Social media exists. Facebook, Instagram, all these things exist to sell things. They're marketing tools, and that's what they do. So having extreme things from any end of the spectrum is always good for them, because that sells for them. But the context of understanding that, listen, American cities had entire policies that held generations of African Americans back, that never gets portrayed through social media, right? You only understand that from education or talking to someone who knows what they're talking about. So that was a very important time for me to start to understand that and to learn more about that. Since working with Ashland for Change, I've learned a lot more about that, because now we're doing events for like Juneteenth, and we're doing when Martin Luther King rolls around. Obviously, most cities do some type of Martin Luther King event, but it feels like we just do the event to do the event. We need to be scratching a little bit farther under the surface there. And, sorry. I was talking about the campaign and all of that, which my campaign, in the midst of all these just, major critical social issues that were happening, is really nothing. But, it was, for me, it was something that I was doing, and I kind of had to gauge, I'm in a small town in Eastern Kentucky. If I show support for a group or, a social cause like that, it's going to affect me. And, right then I had to make that decision if that's something that I want to do or not. And, for me, it was a no-brainer. I wanted to do it, or else, there's no reason for me to be in public office if I'm going to sacrifice that. But, the one thing we talked about this past year, and more about Dr. King, the letter from Birmingham jail is an important, just one of the most important documents, I think, in our history. And I love that letter, because he's not talking to you know, the KKK or all these groups that he was fighting against, or really in the government or anything like that. He was talking to his fellow clergymen, and he was talking to, because they were essentially saying, okay, we understand what you're doing, but tone it down a little bit, you know, and it's, you know, don't be. And then he's literally writing this from jail, so, you know, he didn't tone it down, and he, you know, he's explaining to them that their reluctance to speak out and support him in the way that they should is the problem. It's not what he's doing, it's what they are doing. And you know, it's that letter, I'll go back and read that sometimes, and to kind of remind myself. And when issues come up that I'm not really sure about, you know, how I should or shouldn't say or what I should do, I read that to kind of remind myself, because, you know, inaction or not taking a side is almost as bad as being against sometimes. Indifference is you know, sometimes is the worst thing you can do. So, you know, that's one of the reasons why you'll see me support things like that. You know, support social issues and or at least be willing to talk about them, or at least facilitate the discussion, allow the sides, you know, allow people to have their voice and to talk about it. You know, as a city, and by the way, I, you know, obviously I don't talk on behalf here today of the company or a city or anything. I'm talking as Josh Blanton, my personal views. But as a city official, I think that's the important part, is no matter who you are or where you're coming from or what you want to say, we're giving an environment, we're making our city a place where you can feel comfortable doing that. I think that we can do a better job of owning the fact that we very much still have a problem. I've seen that firsthand. I've had family members who have had to who've suffered through issues that have happened to them, and you know, it's we have to own the fact that we still have a lot of work to do. Now, I would argue that with Ashland for Change and Ashland for Pride, and although I do think it's important to mention, sometimes people will group these social causes or certain groups together. Racial equality and rights for the LGBTQIA plus community, totally separate, right? They're fighting for their own equality. I think sometimes in discussions like this, they get grouped together but you know, for me, it's important for me to understand the differences in their fight as well, and the different things that they come up against. And we've tried to do that, and some of the proclamation we did this past year was really special. And I mean, we literally said that Ashland, you know, is a place where everyone can be welcomed. You know, we use the word sexual orientation. We said gender identity. You know, we use those words. We said it, and I think that's important. It's a big step for the city. It's not enough. We know there's a lot more to do. But it's a big step, and our mayor did that, and I commend him for doing that. We got a lot of work to do, but it takes first of all facilitating that discussion, making the city a place where people are comfortable having those discussions, and not in this world of social media where you're seeing out of context quotes or the most extreme views of some certain topic. It's context, and it's events just like this where we can have, you know, where we can talk to each other. And it's, you know, it's always amazing when and you know, obviously COVID was a tough thing for that, because you're not in person, and the discussion is always going to be different when you're face to face with someone and understanding and feeling what they're saying. You're you know, it's, you know, I learned a few years ago that communication, 93% of communication is nonverbal. And so when you're hearing and understanding what someone's going through, if you're not doing that in person or having even virtually, you're not truly getting the feeling of what they're going through. Like I said, you're not going to ever fully understand where they're coming from, but you know, empathy empathy is not a bad word, and there are some people who have turned empathy into a bad word, and it's not at all. It's a great word, and it's a word that we really need to get better at understanding how to use. And so that's kind of the way I've kind of tried to do things. And I was talking to somebody today actually, and he's from the area but doesn't live here now, and he was talking about Ashland for Change, and he said, oh, I love what you've done with that group. And I said, wait a minute, it's that's not my the Ashland for Change is the work that's happened there has because of a group of people. I've been support as much as I can, and I love those people to death, but that group has happened because of the work of several other people. And so I have to be cognizant of that, and to be sure that my support doesn't bleed over into, well, this is your, it's not, it's my support of it. It's something that I think that should be happening here. And so we've had some really great discussions with that group, and Ashland Pride as well, doing some really great things. And that's it's very encouraging to see that happen, and I'm very fortunate to be in this position during a time in our city when this is happening. And it's and to have colleagues who who, when we do these proclamations, we have a mayor who did that proclamation, and I appreciate that. So it's like I said, there's a lot of work to do, but it's it takes discussions like this for people to understand, and to start to talk about the details of this, and why why it's important for us to have organizations like Ashland for Change and Ashland Pride. And yeah, so I feel like I said a lot in 39 minutes, but yeah, so if I don't know, any questions so far about, or should I keep speaking for 39 more minutes, or I don't know.
We do have one question in the chat, and Robert normally moderates these, so I'm stepping in today. So I forgot to mention at the beginning that people can post questions in the chat, and when we open up for questions, that if they're willing to and they want to speak, they can speak and turn on the camera. So one question is from earlier when you were talking about your life and your mom and those experiences. That's a powerful story. From where did you draw strength during those difficult years?
I don't know that I did. Strength is not the word. I think survival is the word to use to those situations. And I think back. I can remember literally living in Ironton and having a period where I had no electricity, and was out of school, and literally could not think of a worse situation. And where do I go from here? And now I had heard a quote, and I cannot remember exactly where, and it was a very simple quote, but it was, keep showing up, keep showing up. And so I kept showing up to work at the time. By the way, being a server and in the food industry and serving the public I've literally been in explosions and steel mills at this point in my life, and not been as stressed as I've been waiting tables. It is the most stressful job in the world. So I did not enjoy going to that job, but at the time, it's all I had. It is literally all I had at the time. So I kept showing up, went back into John Miller's office, said, I want to try to do anything I can to get back into school. Kept pushing, and got back into school. There was a professor who literally changed my life, and his name is Randy Ashburn. I don't even know if he's still at the school. He probably is not, because this is a long time ago, but he was a judge in Portsmouth, I believe, but he was an adjunct, and really one of the inspirations for me to be an adjunct at Marshall. But he taught political science, and I took his political science class. I just took it because it fit my schedule, I think, at the time. But the way he approached things, as he was always the devil's advocate. He was always the other side of the story, no matter what the issue was. And I love that. And to this day, I have no idea what his political beliefs are, because he always took the other side of the issue. And back in that time, that was 2001, 2002 time period. So you're talking George W. Bush, Al Gore, that election, and all of that, and which it seems like they were mild political opinions now in today's world, but back then they were pretty. It was pretty controversial, and different students had the way they saw different things, and he always took the other side and always beat them in whatever the argument was. And so I kept taking his classes. I took a constitutional law class that he offered. I didn't even need for my major, but and we had to do a huge paper on Supreme Court decisions. And most people were picking a lot of popular Supreme Court cases. And I went to him and I said, I'd like to do something not so popular, something out there. And we started talking about it. And we actually, I chose the case where the Cherokee Nation sued the government when the policies were put into place by the government. It was really the beginning of what was the Trail of Tears and driving the Native American population out of Georgia. And Andrew Jackson was really the one doing that. And so I did my paper on that decision about the Supreme Court decision that came down and basically said, no, federal government cannot do this to you. You're a separate sovereign nation. And Andrew Jackson did it anyway and drove them out and essentially started the Trail of Tears in defiance of a Supreme Court ruling. And that paper was pretty important for me as well, because I never understood what happened there until I did that paper. And that's not something you learn. They teach you about the Trail of Tears in school, but they don't teach you about what happened leading up to it. And that was incredibly important and that was like a 30-page paper that I loved every second of. And I got to the end of it and I said, I just did a 30-page paper and I loved it. And it didn't even feel like work to me. So, that was, and he really started to engage me then. And he really cared because he could see I was taking an interest in it. And I credit him with really helping me to get through college, get through undergrad, because he was just an amazing instructor. And like I said, I wish I had kept up with him after school, but I haven't, because he needed to be full time, in my opinion, because he was excellent. But I strayed way far away from your question, by the way. But it's like I say, it was survival. And a lot of people that are in those situations, I'm incredibly fortunate that things happened in a way that I was able to keep progressing because, and this is the other part, I have no doubt that things helped me. I had support in those situations that other people are not going to have the ability to have. And so I fully recognize that. And there are plenty of people who could have been in my situation that wouldn't have been given the same opportunities that I was given. And I think it's important to recognize that. And that's why it's important for me to, understand. There's a podcast that one of my friends told me about it. It's called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. And there's an episode where he talks about, he kind of uses the example of a running race in a track, like a 400-meter dash or something like that. And he said, okay, imagine you're racing someone else and you line up at the starting gate. Well, then all of a sudden they pull you back 50 yards and then they shoot the gun. Well, in order for you to have the same advantage of your competitor, you're going to have to catch up 50 yards, right? And so he uses that to kind of explain, the systemic problems that we had in the past and the government having, very oppressive type policies. That was us pulling populations back 50 yards. That's what was happening there. And that's why things like affirmative action and other policies like that need to happen, because we need to make up those 50 yards. And I think that's very, very important to understand that context. And that feels simple in the way that he explained that, but that simplicity is not conveyed to a lot of people, and they don't understand it that way. They hear, you hear things like, I don't see color, or well, that's a problem. You need to see why we need those policies. And that's, that's one of the most simple, best explanations for it that I can give. I try to think about, how do I explain that to another white person or to someone who's of a different mindset. I don't really seek to change anyone's beliefs on things like that, but I do want to convey why I believe that, and I think that does a good job of doing that. Thanks for that question.
Does anyone?
Hi, Josh. This is Jackie. I work in the advising center at Ohio University Southern. Your face looks very familiar to me. I've been here a long time. Worked with Johnny Miller. He did pass, unfortunately, a few years ago, so I wanted to let you know that. But I'm sure you put a smile on his face today. He had great joy in helping students, so I'm sure he's appreciative of that comment that you made today. And thank you for sharing your story. I do have a question, and if it's something you're not wanting, a part of the story you're not wanting to share, I was just curious during that time, when your mom was in her biggest throes of addiction, was your dad still in the picture or involved at all during that time?
Yeah, he was. And that's, I usually don't mention that part. My dad was very supportive, but, this is something that happens, I think, in a lot of family situations like we had. I only went to my dad's every other weekend. And so my dad now, I think he's much more, we have a very, very close bond now. I think during that time, a lot of that was going on because I talked about being in denial, but I also didn't want people to see her that way. And so I would never have went to my dad and said, "Dad, I'm in trouble," or "Dad, this is going on." He would have helped in an instant for sure. But it was just something that I really didn't, I don't know. And I think my sister kind of felt the same way, but it was one of those things we just didn't want them to know. I mean, there was always a little bit of hope that it was going to, that situation, things were going to, she was going to get better, or, something was going to change with the situation. So, I don't want to make it sound like that he was just, he knew about he didn't know about hardly anything that was happening at that time, to be honest. And that was just because we really didn't want to admit what was happening. So, looking back on it, I probably should have reached out. But, again, I was 18. So it was, it was just something that I lived with her, and it was, that's kind of the way it was. So yeah, that's a good question though. And I'm always a little bit, when I tell that story, I'm always, because my dad is a huge part of my life now. And he, like I said, he was worked in the steel mill, and really the reason why I got into my career. And she's just so supportive now. I mean, I have the best dad in the world, really. So I always think about, should I mention that in the story or shouldn't? So thanks for asking the question.
Well, thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. I know in many times in a divorce situation, especially when you're young, when it happens, obviously one of your defense mechanisms is to protect that other parent. Yeah. Sometimes depending on, the relationship, between the two parents as well. So sure. Thank you.
No problem.
Does anyone else have a question or a comment? I just want to comment on something you didn't mention, but I know about you. So your astrophotography, is that what you call it?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're actually teaching that too, right?
Yeah. So it's funny because being a city commissioner or whatnot, you'd think that there would be different things that you would have to speak about when you're doing that. But for those of you that don't know me, a hobby of mine is I have a telescope, and I do astrophotography. And I've spoken to more groups and more schools and more just all kinds of groups about that. That's what they want to talk about. They don't want to talk about the city stuff or steel industry stuff or any of that. They want to talk about how we take those pictures. So that's been really fun to do because, I've been out to KCU twice. I went back to my old high school, a few other places. Paul Blazer High School. I just spoke to their art group. And that's really fun. And that's kind of a hobby that I took up just to kind of get away from the daily life. And it's something that's totally different than what I do, on a daily basis. So, yeah, it's very enjoyable. And I think we all kind of need that hobby that pulls us away from what we do on a day-to-day basis.
I teach a UC 1000 class, which is a freshman class. And one of the weeks we talk about self care. What you just described was self care. So,
Yeah.
and the things that you said today, I think would resonate with a lot of our students. And I really wish they could all be here to hear you talk about resilience, making mistakes, the importance of those mistakes, because when you make mistakes, that means you're taking a risk. When you're taking a risk, you're growing.
Yeah.
So, thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else have any questions today? Any comments? Do you have anything else that you want to share or to say as we wrap this up? And again, thank you for sharing your story with us. It was a very powerful story, and I honestly didn't know part of that. So thank you. I learned a new aspect of who you are, and some of what's behind who you are. So again, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. It's like I said, it can be an intense story, but I think it's important to really convey that. And listen, I'm coming out of that situation, I'm like a lot of young men that are in this area and have that same situation. But then, when we talk about growing and understanding other people of other races, people of other viewpoints, it doesn't matter where you come from. If you're willing to listen and educate yourself and just say, what did you go through, and why, what do you want me to know about you? I think that's incredibly important. So thank you for having me in this. And there's not many opportunities where you have open dialogue to talk about these things like this, and I hate that because like it's it's so good. It's so good to be able to have these discussions. And I think I really need to take it on myself to figure out more ways in the city to have these discussions.
We do have another comment. A lot of people in the chat are saying thank you. But one person said, in my experience, there is a lot of shame surrounding addiction, not just for the addicts. I hope we can overcome that as a society, so those in the throes of addiction can have the full support they deserve.
Yep.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah, it's and in Ashland, we'll see that manifest sometimes, especially when you hear discussions about, like, not to say, all panhandlers and people like that are, addicted, but a lot of times some people are, and you'll hear that, well, they just want the money for drugs, or what. Well, yeah, I mean, maybe they do. That might be the case, and that doesn't change how we shouldn't really, we go back and forth about things like that. And I always get super frustrated with that because people want to, what you're seeing there is a symptom of the problem, right? You're seeing a symptom of a huge issue, and people want to eliminate the symptom because they don't like looking at it. They don't want to talk about how we get to the root of the problem. They want to criticize, places that we have for these people to get treatment or get help. You'll hear complaints about where they're located and things like that. They don't want to see it. So it's and listen, if you know anything about me, I live downtown. I'm in downtown Ashland right now, and downtown revitalization is one of the biggest things that we're doing in Ashland right now. I'm very passionate about it. So when I hear people make that comment that, well, yeah, but you've got people asking for money on different parts, I'm quick to stop that conversation immediately and say, well, then we need to be better at getting to the root of the problem. There's nobody that pushes harder for revitalization downtown than I do, but that's not at the expense of just pushing away what is the symptom of the problem.
Last few minutes. Anyone else? Well, again, thank you, Josh, for participating today. For sure. Um, Very powerful story, and this continues our series. Again, we believe, as Dr. King believed, that people who know each other, who communicate with each other, don't fear each other. So the I Am series is a part of our goal to have these conversations. Um, we did them in person in the past. COVID has caused us to do this, but we enjoy having people come in and share their stories. Have those conversations, like you said, have those conversations.
Yeah.
And thank you. I think one more comment. There is a survey.
Oh, yeah.
Just put into this chat, and we ask everyone to complete the survey. It gives us information about this and future events. So thank you everyone for attending today. This survey will still be in your team's chat, even if you close out. But we ask you to go ahead and take a couple of minutes and complete the survey. Again, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you, Josh, for coming and sharing your story. We're gonna get Cecia in the spring, we're hoping.
Oh Lord, you better be ready for her.
Thank you again. Give her a heads up. We're gonna reach out to her.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.